Hey guys, welcome back to Crew Summer Connect. As we dig into today's topic, I know that we all have people in our lives that don't know the good news of Jesus. Many times it's hard for us to engage in spiritual conversations with them. What do I say? How do I start the conversation? We'll find out today with Matt Mikalatos. Matt has been on staff with Crew for 20 years and currently serves in Portland, Oregon. As an author, he's had his work featured in Time, Relevant, Daily Science Fiction, and more. He's passionate about helping students understand what it means to share their faith and learn to listen to others. Here's Matt Mikalatos.
When I was in college, there was a knock on my dorm room door, and I open it, and it's some kid I've never seen before. And he says to me, he doesn't ask my name, he doesn't tell me his name, he says, "You need to stop smoking pot, stop sleeping with your girlfriend, and come to Jesus." I said, "Hey man, I don't even know where to buy pot." And he's like, "Don't give me that. You need to stop smoking pot, stop sleeping with your girlfriend, and come to Jesus." And I was like, "My girlfriend lives 8 hours away." And I'm not saying I never thought about it, but that's real far. And he was like, no. He's like, "Stop smoking pot, stop sleeping with your girlfriend, and come to Jesus." And I was like, "You don't know me." And then he just kept saying it over and over. So finally I say to him, I was like, "Look, I'm a Christian." And then he gives me this giant hug. He's like, "Brother." So I was like, well, that seems weird. And the good news about Jesus he was bringing was not really recognizable as good news to me. I wasn't like, "Hey, let's go tell everyone in the dorms that you think they should stop smoking pot and stop sleeping with people and come to Jesus." It wasn't like immediately something that I thought all my friends will love this, right? Part of the problem is what he's focused on is something that many times we become focused on as we're talking to people about Jesus, which is the fact that we as human beings are broken, that we're sinful, right? So this was his key thing he was thinking about. And many times, particularly in evangelical Christianity, that's what we focus on, but that's not the totality of how God talks about human beings. Another really important part of human beings is what we call the image of God, or what God calls being made in the image of God, that human beings are made in God's image. And how many people, this might be hard to do since many of you are on the internet. Have you ever been to Thailand? Has anyone in this room been to Thailand before? No one, okay, I will explain it to you then. In Thailand, there's the king of Thailand, and everywhere you go in Thailand, there are pictures of the king. Like a skyscraper will have a banner that takes up the entire thing with just one giant picture of the king. If you get in a taxi cab, there'll be like a little tiny photo of the king hanging from the mirror. When you go to the movies, they play a trailer about the king and everyone stands up for it. When you get on an airplane, Thai Air, as you're about to take off, before you take off, they do the safety thing, like what to do if we crash, and then they show you a little video about the king. And it's illegal to mess with the image of the king because it's disrespectful and it's showing that you're against the king. So there was a dude from Finland, I think, that while he was visiting Thailand, went out with spray paint and covered 2 images of the king, and he got 7 years in jail. Yeah, which is, I mean, the vacation got a lot longer, that's all, it's fine. But here's the thing. The image of the king shows us a few things, right? Part of what the image of the king does is it says this belongs to the king. It's about ownership. This is the king's. The second thing is it shows us the king's character. So a lot of the videos you watch about the king, like before the movie, will be things like the king taking care of a baby elephant, right? Or the king giving something to some poor Thai people. It's things that reveal what's important to him and what he cares about, and it shows us who the king is. And then the third thing that the image of the king shows us is that the king is sovereign over this space, that he can do what he pleases here. So to rebel against the king by destroying the image of the king is illegal. It's an act of rebellion against his person. It's to say that you disbelieve his character, or that you're saying this doesn't belong to him, or this is not his space. And this is the same way God talks about us as human beings. We don't spend a lot of time, maybe no time, talking about what it means for human beings, not just Christians. Human beings are made in the image of God. And that's starting in the very beginning in Genesis chapter 1, verse 27. It says this: God created humanity in his image. In the image of God, he created them, male and female, he created them. So if all people are made in the image of God, what that teaches us is that every single person, all people, inherently have worth. They're important because they're made in the image of God. That to harm the image of God, right, to hurt another human being, is an act of rebellion against God. That's why things like, assault or killing someone or any variety of those things, those are evil. They're attacks on the image of God. And also, what this also means is if every human being is made in the image of God reveals the character of God, which means every single human being on earth, no matter who they are or where they're coming from or what horrible things they may be involved in, we can learn something about who God is in them because of the image of God in them. And a lot of times we think we're coming to talk to someone who's not a Christian about God, and we think we have all knowledge of God and we need to give that to them. But we can also learn about God from them, which is a little weird. It can be different. It can feel strange to think that. And also, we can trust that because these people belong to God, because he loves them, that God is going to do the right thing in relationship to them and desires to bring them to himself. And we don't need to be stressed out about how it's all going to work or feel like we're responsible for it all. So let me share with you one story where we see Jesus interacting in this space. It's from the book of John, and it's from chapter 8. And in this story, what's happening, so it's at the very beginning, the first 12 verses. What happens is Jesus is teaching in the temple. So he's just hanging out with the people. And what happens is some religious people, really strong religious people, people who are always doing the right thing, trying to follow God, come up to try and trick him, basically. And they bring a woman with them that they say, "Teacher, we caught this woman in the act of adultery. She was cheating. She was having sex she should not have. And what the Bible says is that we should kill her by throwing rocks at her. So, do you hate the Bible or should we kill her?" Right? They're trying to put him in this place of saying, well, this is what the Bible says. It's very clear. What should we do? And there's some weird things about this moment. Notice that it's just the woman. Like if they caught her in the act, it seems like there might have been more than one person involved. But I don't know, maybe the guy was a faster runner. I'm just not sure. We don't know for certain. Most likely, almost certainly, what was happening was a deeply ingrained issue of sexism as part of what's happening here. It very well may be that person, the other person that she was caught with, could have been in the crowd still. We don't know. But they bring this woman to Jesus, and they say to him, she deserves to be punished. She's done something evil. She's done something wrong, right? And I don't know about you. My expectation is that Jesus should say, the wages of sin is death. She's done the wrong thing. The Bible's very clear on this. Yeah? That's not what he does. He says, you probably know this, he says, whoever has no sin in their lives, whoever's doing everything right, go ahead. You be the one to pick up the stone. You throw it first. And then the weirdest thing, he gets down and he starts to draw on the ground with his finger, or to write. It's actually the only place in Scripture we see Jesus writing. And we don't know what he wrote. That everyone has their favorite theory. You know, some people think it's like that he wrote the 10 Commandments to remind them which things they may have broken. Some people think he just wrote, love God, love others, and that's sufficient to know that you're broken, that you've messed up. Some people think that he wrote, what happens in the last season of Game of Thrones. We're not sure. But whatever he wrote, he just kept doing it, and he waited. And what happened is, starting with the oldest, and we presume the wisest of those who had brought this woman, they just started to leave. They just walked away. And soon all of them had walked away. And Jesus looks up and sees this woman standing alone, and he says to her, "Has no one condemned you?" And she says, "No, sir, no one." And then Jesus says, "Then neither do I condemn you." Which is astonishing, that she's face to face with God, the embodiment of God in human form, standing in front of her. She was caught in the act of doing something that we know is sin. That guy knocking on my dorm room basically was talking about this, right? Stop sleeping with your girlfriend. We know that it's something she shouldn't have been involved in. And Jesus says, if they don't condemn you, I don't either. Well, that's really different than what I expect God to say in that moment. Because to start to think of people in the image of God moves us away from condemnation and toward restoration, which is to say, we see people in the image of God, we see the places where they're not reflecting God truly, and we say, let's fix that. Let's make it better. Let's restore you to what you were designed to be, which is the image of God, showing God's character well. And you're not there yet, but we can move to that place. So focusing on the image of God moves us away from condemnation and toward restoration. And that's what Jesus does. He says, if they don't condemn you, neither do I. And then he says, go and don't sin anymore, right? Be restored. Live a better life. There's something better than what you have experienced so far. So for us to move from condemnation toward restoration, what does that look like in conversations with our friends? Well, I think it could be things like this. When we're having a hard conversation with a friend, I think there is a temptation, a tendency to move toward the black and white answers, that when my friend says, I'm struggling with this in life, that I say, that's wrong, don't do that, right? Instead of treating them with respect first and talking about like, yeah, that's hard, I understand. I have things I'm struggling with, yeah? And I'm not saying be dishonest. I'm saying, can we be respectful and loving of the image of God in that person and talk about how do we restore this better thing in your life? Not that we know that we're broken. That's the thing. We get so caught up in telling people, hey, I want to make sure you know you're sinful, you're broken. I don't know anyone who doesn't already know that. All of my friends already know this. I never have to explain to someone, oh man, when we get caught up in, hey, I've been watching your life and here's 3 things you're doing really wrong. Who wants that conversation? No one. I mean, that's why we don't call our parents on the weekends, right? So I'm just saying, and our parents is the same thing. They want us to have a better life, right? So they're trying to help us move forward. But what happens is we get so caught up in telling people the laundry list of all the things they're doing wrong. Instead of something as simple as saying, what I often ask people is, hey, have you ever broken your own moral code? Not my moral code, not the Bible's moral code, not the Christian's moral code, your moral code. Everyone says yes. They're like, of course I have. Is that something you like in your life? No? I mean, I wish I could find a way through that. Great, let's talk about that. Because they desire to be restored in the image of God. They desire to be restored to relationship with God, even if they don't know that that's what's going on, if they don't recognize it. Also, I think because they're made in the image of God, we share the good news about Jesus with others, but we're also growing in it. We're always learning more good news about people, which means one of the things we should be doing in relationship with others is asking them questions and listening to them. Oftentimes, people who are further from God can have insights about God that we've not come to yet. Different ones, right? So there's real value in learning about God as we speak about God with other people. So a couple things to try as we're learning about God's character, as we're growing in relationship with others, as we're restoring the image of God. Let me give you a couple concrete things you can try in conversations. Number one, before you talk to someone about Jesus, a friend, someone you know, ask yourself this: what do I know about Jesus that's good news specifically for this person? Not my good news presentation that I always use that I've got planned out. That's fine, that's good. But what is really good news that I know about Jesus, me personally, that would be good for this person? So someone who's just lost a loved one, let's say. What do I know about Jesus that would be good news for them? Man, God mourns with those who mourn. That God is the resurrection. That God loves people, even in difficult times. So that's one thing. Another thing, try to have an evangelistic conversation where all you do is ask questions. You only say statements in response to a direct question. Just keep asking other people questions and see where that goes. And then one other thing, as I would just mention that I use all the time, is just the phrase, tell me more about that. Super, super helpful. When I'm starting to talk to someone and they're like, I don't want to talk to you freaky Christians, I don't want to have anything to do with Christians, and I don't want to talk to you, I just say, oh, tell me more about that. And they're like, yeah. And they start like venting. Christians are the worst. I hate them. Terrible things they've done. Tell me more about that. Okay, here's a list. Great, tell me more about that. And like 45 minutes later, they're like, why am I still talking to you? I'm so angry. And I'm like, tell me more about that, right? And we just keep going and going and going. Because people want to be known. And we want to know them because they are made in the image of God just like we are. And as we move toward this, away from condemnation and toward restoration, it alters the way we interact with people. And it moves us and them closer to Christ and closer to one another. Thank you. Thank you for that vigorous applause. We have some time for questions. If anyone has questions they would like to ask.
So I know it's easy, at least for me, like to talk to my friends just casually, like have conversations on hours on end with them. But sometimes it's hard for me to talk spiritually with them. And so how would you, I know you said ask questions, but what would that look like to ask questions and kind of transition that conversation?
Yeah, so a lot of times in our culture, in the US, spiritual conversations are really weird and awkward, right? Or political conversations, a variety of things. One thing is to normalize it, just make it normal. I think sometimes we hide, where I live, we hide our spiritual lives. Like you can know someone for 10 years and then they're like, hey, when my car leaves on Sunday, I'm not playing golf, I'm going to church. And everyone's like, what, you're a church person? So I think sometimes it's just like making it normal, like, hey man, I'm learning this thing this week, do you want to hear about it? It could be as simple as a lot of times our emotional lives and our spiritual lives are intertwined in things. So when you know somebody's having a rough time with someone they're dating, just saying, like, how's that going? How are you feeling? What's going on? Like, what do you think? It leads to bigger questions about the world, right? Am I loved? Am I alone? You know, these sorts of things. And I think just sharing honestly your own experience can be really good. Like, I know sometimes people do this thing where they say something like, someday, the power of someday, right? Someday, I'd love to have a conversation with you about some stuff that's really important in my life. And I wonder if you'd be open to that. Like, let's just grab a meal sometime and talk about it. And you don't say Thursday at noon, right? You just say, hey, I'd like to open the door to this conversation and wait for them to bite on that. And you can bring it up occasionally. So that's a couple things you can try. I'm trying to think if I have any other good advice. Well, I would just say this. A lot of initiating with people about talking about spiritual things is just looking for open doors, places where they're ready to talk, and just seeing where it takes you. And I will tell you this one story. One quick story is this. When I was first on staff with Crew, we were living in Seattle, and there was a guy in our movement, our student movement, who was a devout Christian and his girlfriend was not. And he couldn't figure out how to bring the conversation up with her because he didn't want her to break up with him. But what happened is she started she started hanging out with some of the other women in our movement, and one of them led her to Christ. So she came back to her boyfriend and said, "Hey, why did you never tell me that I could have eternal life with Jesus?" And he was like, "I didn't want you to break up with me." And she was like, "Well, guess what?" And she broke up with him because he had revealed that he didn't care enough about her to risk something in the relationship to share something good and beautiful he had. And I think if we focus on loving our friends, that there will absolutely be times where it's completely natural for us to say, "You are going through this thing. I know it's hard. Can I share with you something good and beautiful in my life that I think you might find helpful?" Thanks for the question. What else do we have?
So I have found it a little bit difficult, like forming relationships after sharing Christ with someone when I do it in more of a initiative evangelism way, like in class or just with people I meet on campus. So is there a way to, it's almost like the reverse of the other question that was asked, going from sharing to then trying to make it normal to be like friends with them and almost going into discipleship?
So you're saying you spoke to someone who's more or less a stranger, talked to them about Jesus, and now it seems awkward when you want to be friends.
Oh, yes, for sure.
Because they're worried that you're going to do the same thing again, and that all you care about is getting them to agree with you. Yeah? Okay. Well, yeah, that's awkward and weird, right? I think one of the things you can do if that happens is you can just say, "Wow, I feel like things have been awkward and weird because I started out by saying this to you, but I actually want to be friends with you. So what if we go do this thing, and I'm not going to bring up this stuff until you tell me it's okay." There's I think consent in spiritual conversations is really important. What I mean by that is if you let the other person know that you'll disengage from the conversation if they ask you to, it makes them feel more comfortable and more confident. So if you say to them, "Hey, I'd like to share some spiritual things with you. Would that be okay?" And they say, "Sure, we could do that." And you start having the conversation, and then they say, "I'm feeling a little uncomfortable with this conversation." You say, "No worries. We'll come back to this later if you want to." Right? That gives them a feeling that you're trustworthy and that you're not going to harm them. Right? So I think you basically want to set it up so they know that now. That you're coming to them and saying like, "Hey, I feel like it's been weird, but I don't want it to be, and I actually legitimately want to be your friend." And I think from there, now that conversation in itself could be weird too, yeah? But what it shows is that you're being honest, you're being kind, you're wanting to be in a relationship. And let's be honest, everyone wants more friends. So getting through a little weirdness to get a friendship, most people are willing to do. So I'd say just be kind, be loving, and keep a long-term thing. If you're going to be in the same class for 6 months, right? Don't worry about like, okay, in the next 27 hours, I need to lay the entire gospel out. You've got time, right? Build the relationship, spend time together, and make sure they know that you care about them. Yeah. Is that helpful?
Yes, that was great.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, who else? Here's one.
So it feels like in today's world, disagreeing with someone is almost equated as hating them. So how would you suggest navigating a conversation where someone's expressing something that you know to be sinful and that you disagree with, and they're almost asking for your opinion, but you want to be able to share that, standing firm in your faith without expressing hate and being able to express Christ's love?
That's a great question, and I think it's something our entire culture is wrestling with right now. Like, for instance, we all know someone who voted incorrectly in the presidential elections, right? Many of them in our families. And see, you all know without me saying which side that is for you, yeah? I think that the core piece is people are able to disagree well if they know that you love them and the relationship is not at risk. So my parents and I disagree on some political things, and we can have that conversation because I know I'm not going to be disowned for voting differently, right? And I think we're not in a habit of telling people in our relationships, like our friends in class, we're not in the habit of saying, hey, I care about you and I'm not going to go away just because we disagree, because it seems a little too honest, maybe. But I do think for us to move to that place, that's something we have to do. We have to be expressive with our love with other people. So I think in that sort of situation, let's say someone is involved in something that's very difficult for you, for us as believers, that you're able to say to them, like, I think you know where we disagree on this topic, and I just want to say, you know, I love you. You're my friend. I'm glad to hang out with you forever. You're always welcome at the stuff I'm doing. And that's not going to be something that comes between us, right? Because the reason people feel like disagreeing is hate is because they feel like it's moving toward condemnation. What you're saying is not, oh, we disagree. You're saying you are a terrible person. And if we can move away from condemnation and toward restoration, where we're saying something like, I just think your life could be better a different way, but it's also your life. And I love you and I'm going to stay in your life, whatever you choose. I think that goes a long way to making those disagreements easier to have. Some of my closest friends, we have extreme disagreements on really, really important topics, but we still love each other and can hang out, and we're growing as we get to know each other's positions and learning things from each other. Yeah. All right, who else?
My question is, how do you, like, if you're in a conversation, how do you navigate things when you're, like, uncertain about certain, like, if you're, like, in a topic where you're like, oh, I really don't know, like, what I think about that. Like, how do you navigate that?
I love this question. This is so important. I think what we've been taught in a lot of ways is that Christians are meant to be the people who have every answer. That whatever question someone comes up with, you're like, of course I have comprehensive knowledge of that topic. They're like, hey, could we talk about stem cells and ethics? You're like, of course, the Bible's very clear on this topic, right? And you just start laying it out. It actually feels really weird to people when you never say, I don't know. When you know every answer. There was a missionary from a cult that used to come to my house all the time, and he had this book. It wasn't the Bible or anything like that. It was a book that any question I asked, if he didn't know the answer, he's like, hold on. He would turn to the table of contents, he would flip to a page, he would read it, and then he would give me an answer. The cult had provided all his answers. And I was always like, why do you come here? Why don't you just give me your book? But the point was, he didn't know the answers. He knew what his cult taught was in the book. And I think it is so powerful and so beautiful to be able to say to someone, I have no idea the answer to that question. Let's figure it out together. Let's talk about it. Let's discuss it. Let's talk to other people who might have stronger opinions or more knowledge. And yeah, I have no idea. Because what it does is it removes this feeling of I'm the teacher and you're the student, and moves us instead toward this idea of we're on a journey together. And you have things to learn spiritually, and I have things to learn spiritually. How can we help each other? And that's a much better feeling. I would much rather have someone come alongside in my life and say, I know some things you don't, but you know a bunch of things I don't too, and let's figure it out. So that would be my suggestion. Just be honest. Just be honest and be kind. So thank you, everybody. Really appreciate it. That is our time for today.
As I'm thinking about the people in my life that I want to share with, I'm reminded that the gospel really can be good news for everyone. If we step out and simply listen to others, we can learn so much, and God can use those conversations for His glory. This week, we want to help equip you to share the gospel with anyone. So we're offering a chapter of Matt's book, Good News for a Change. Just text Good News to 555-888 and we'll send it to you. This summer, we also have another opportunity to step out in faith. Though there might be Cru at your university, there are hundreds of college campuses in the U.S. without a Christian movement. This means that students at those schools might not even have a chance to engage in spiritual conversations or respond to the good news of Jesus. This is why Cru is partnering with InterVarsity and other campus ministries to help create an opportunity for every student on every campus to hear the gospel. And you can be a part of this. Whether you're in college, high school, or middle school, we invite you to visit everycampus.com. Find a campus near you and organize a prayer walk on that campus with those in your community. Pray that God would move on that campus and create a community where students have the opportunity to respond to the gospel. Thanks for joining us today. We'll see you next week.